There's a photograph that still exists. No one talks about it. No one frames it, but it's there, tucked in the back of a drawer in a farmhouse in eastern Kentucky, where the walls remember things the living wish they could forget. In that photograph, taken in 1887, 7 men stand in front of a mountain. Their eyes are hollow, their faces are stone, and behind them, barely visible in the morning fog, you can see the mouth of a cave. The same cave their grandfather entered in 1823. The same cave he never came out of. Not the way he went in. This isn't folklore. This isn't legend passed down through campfire stories or ghost tours designed to thrill tourists. This is documented, this is real. And what happened to the Halleck family, what started in those mountains and followed them for 5 generations, is a story most historians won't touch. Because once you know it, once you really sit with what it means, you realize that some wounds don't heal, some debts don't get paid, and some curses don't care how much time has passed. The Halleck name used to mean something. It used to carry weight in the valleys of Appalachia, back when the land was still wild and families carved their survival out of stone and soil. But by 1901, that name was whispered. By 1947, it was avoided, and by 1983, when the last of the bloodline tried to break free, the mountains had already made their decision. You don't leave, you don't escape, and you don't pretend it never happened, because it did happen, and it's still happening. It began with a man named Silas Halleck, a trapper, a hunter, a man who knew the mountains better than he knew his own children. In the spring of 1823, Silas told his wife he'd be gone 3 days. He was tracking something, he didn't say what, but the men who knew him, the ones who'd spent winters in those hills, they said Silas had changed in the weeks before he left. He'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating at the table. He'd stand at the edge of the property at night, staring up at the ridge, like something was calling to him, like something had already chosen him. When he didn't come back after a week, his brother went looking, found Silas's rifle leaning against a tree, found his pack untouched, found his boots placed side by side at the entrance to a cave the locals called the Widow's Mouth. But Silas, gone. No body, no blood, no sign of a struggle, just absence, the kind that sits in your chest long after you stop searching. But here's what they don't tell you in the county records. Here's what got left out of the family Bible. Silas came back. 3 months later, in the middle of the night, his wife woke to the sound of something scraping at the door. When she opened it, there he stood, pale thin, eyes like glass. He didn't speak, didn't explain, just walked past her, sat down at the table, and stared at the wall until sunrise. And when the sun finally came up, he looked at her and said 6 words that would haunt every generation after him. I found what they were hiding. He never said who they were, never explained what he'd seen in that cave. But from that day forward, Silas Halleck was a different man. He stopped trapping, stopped leaving the property, and every night, without fail, he would walk to the edge of the woods and stand there, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something to follow him home. His wife begged him to tell her what happened. His children grew up afraid of their own father, and when Silas finally died in 1844, they buried him fast. No ceremony, no priest, just dirt and silence. But the curse, that didn't get buried. Silas had 3 sons. The eldest, Jacob, inherited the land, inherited the house, and whether he knew it or not, he inherited something else, something that didn't show up in the will. By 1851, Jacob Halleck was experiencing the same thing his father had. The sleeplessness, the staring, the pull toward the ridge. His wife wrote letters to her sister, letters that still exist in the Kentucky Historical Society archives, and in them she describes a man unraveling. She wrote about how Jacob would wake up screaming, clawing at his own chest, saying he could feel something inside him that didn't belong. She wrote about how he'd disappear for hours, and when he came back, his hands would be covered in dirt like he'd been digging, but he could never remember where he'd been. In 1855, Jacob walked into the woods, just like his father, just like every Halleck man would after him. They found him 4 days later, sitting inside the Widow's Mouth, alive but unresponsive. His eyes were open, his body was cold, and when they finally got him to speak, all he said was, "It's not finished with us." He died 2 weeks later. The doctor listed it as fever. But the people who knew, the ones who'd seen it before, they called it something else. They called it the taking. Jacob's son, Thomas, tried to run. In 1869, he sold the land, packed his family, and moved to Ohio. He thought distance would save him. He thought leaving the mountains meant leaving the curse behind. But the mountains don't forget, and they don't let go. Within a year, Thomas started hearing things. Footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. Scratching in the walls. His daughter, only 6 years old, told her mother she saw a man standing at the foot of her bed every night. A man who looked like her grandfather. A man who smelled like wet earth and stone. Thomas moved them again, Indiana, then Illinois, then Iowa. But it always followed, and in 1873, on a farm 2 states away from Kentucky, Thomas Halleck walked into his barn and hanged himself. No note, no explanation. But his wife knew. His children knew. And when they buried him, they didn't bring him back to the mountains. They were too afraid of what might wake up if they did. But the bloodline continued, and so did the curse. By the early 1900s, the Halleck name had scattered. Cousins in Tennessee, a nephew in West Virginia, a granddaughter who married into a family in southern Ohio and took a different last name, hoping that would be enough. Hoping the curse tracked names and not blood. She was wrong. Her son, born in 1902, started walking in his sleep at age 7. Started talking to things no one else could see. Started drawing the same symbol over and over again on every surface he could find. A circle, split by 3 jagged lines. His mother had never seen it before, but when she visited the old Halleck property years later, out of some desperate need to understand, she found it, carved into the trees, scratched into the stone near the cave. The same symbol, exactly the same. In 1919, a man named William Halleck, great-grandson of Silas, came back to Kentucky. He'd spent his whole life in Pennsylvania, never even knew about the family history until his father, dying of tuberculosis, grabbed his wrist and told him everything. Told him about Silas, told him about the cave, told him that if William ever had children, he needed to warn them. Needed to make sure they understood what lived in their blood. But William didn't believe him. He thought it was delirium, fever dreams. So after his father died, William went back to the mountains not to run, but to prove it was all nonsense. To prove that curses weren't real and that his family had just been unlucky, just been haunted by coincidence and superstition. He spent 3 days searching for the widow's mouth, and when he found it, he went inside. He brought a lantern, a rope, and a rifle. He told the innkeeper in town he'd be back by sunset. That was April 14th, 1919. They found his body on April 30th, not in the cave, on his front porch, 200 miles away. He'd been dead at least a week. His eyes were open, his hands were folded across his chest, and carved into the wood of the porch, in letters so deep they split the grain, were 4 words. It knows you now. No one ever figured out how his body got there. No one could explain the timeline, and no one in the family ever went looking for answers. Because by then, they understood, you don't question it, you don't investigate it, you just survive it if you can. The curse went quiet for a while, or at least it seemed to. Between 1920 and 1946, there were no documented deaths, no disappearances, no men walking into the woods and never coming back. The remaining Hallecks kept their heads down. They didn't talk about the family history. They didn't return to Kentucky. And they made a silent agreement, passed down through whispers and warnings. Never go back to the mountains, never speak the name Silas, and never under any circumstances go looking for that cave. But in 1947, a young man named Daniel Halleck broke the silence. He was 22, a college student, a rationalist. He'd grown up hearing fragments of the story from his grandmother, but he dismissed it all as Appalachian folklore, the kind of backwoods superstition that kept people afraid and small. So he did what any confident young man in 1947 would do. He decided to write his senior thesis on it. He called it Generational Trauma and Myth Making in Rural America. He thought he was documenting psychology. He thought he was being smart. He went to Kentucky in the summer, interviewed distant relatives who refused to speak to him, found the old Halleck property, now abandoned and rotting into the soil. And against every warning, every instinct, every piece of advice from people who knew better, Daniel Halleck found the widow's mouth, and he went inside. He brought a camera. He brought a notebook. He told his roommate he'd call from town in 2 days. That was July 18th, 1947. The last anyone heard from him was a single phone call on July 20th. The operator said he sounded calm, said he'd found something incredible, said he'd be home soon with proof that would change everything. They found his car 3 weeks later, found his camera, smashed, found his notebook, soaked in something the police report only described as organic residue.
But Daniel, gone just like Silas, just like
Jacob. Just like every man who thought he could face it and win. His family held a funeral with no body, and his mother, the last person to carry the Halleck name in that branch of the family, said something at the service that no one forgot. She said, he went looking for a curse, and the curse was polite enough to introduce itself. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have run? Would you have gone looking? Or would you have done what so many others did? Pretend it never existed and hope it forgot about you. For 36 years, the curse seemed satisfied. No more deaths, no more disappearances. The remaining Hallecks, scattered quiet, careful, lived their lives under a fragile truce. They had children. They moved to cities. They changed their names through marriage and distance. And they convinced themselves that maybe, just maybe, it was over. that whatever debt had been owed, whatever contract had been signed in that cave in 1823 had finally been paid in full. But curses don't expire. They don't forgive. In 1983, a woman named Catherine Marsh was cleaning out her late mother's attic in Columbus, Ohio. She was 41, a schoolteacher, divorced, no children, and she had no idea she was a Halleck. Her mother had hidden it, changed the family name 2 generations back, buried the records, and never once mentioned the mountains. But in that attic, Catherine found a box. Inside were letters, photographs, a family tree drawn in her grandmother's handwriting, and at the top of that tree, written in ink that had faded to the color of dried blood, was the name Silas Halleck. Catherine did what anyone would do. She researched. She traced the family back. She read about the disappearances, the deaths, the cave, and she made a decision that everyone who knew the story would have begged her not to make. She decided to go, not out of arrogance, not out of disbelief, but because she thought if she confronted it, if she went to the cave and faced whatever was there, she could end it. She could be the one who broke the cycle. She could save the bloodline. She drove to Kentucky in October. She found the old property, now nothing but foundation stones and wild grass. She found the widow's mouth exactly where the records said it would be. And she went inside. She brought nothing but a flashlight and a photograph of Silas Halleck, the one from 1887, the one with the hollow eyes. She wanted it to see her. She wanted it to know she wasn't afraid, that she was choosing this. They found her 2 days later, not in the cave, in her car, parked outside a diner 30 miles away. She was sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, eyes open. The engine was still running. The photograph of Silas was on the passenger seat, and on the back of it, written in handwriting that wasn't hers, were 5 words that made the police seal the case and walk away. You should have stayed away. Catherine Marsh died of what the coroner called acute cardiac arrest. No drugs, no trauma, no explanation. Just a heart that stopped. But the people who found her said something the report didn't include. They said her face looked peaceful, like she'd finally understood something, like she'd been shown the answer to a question she didn't know she was asking. Catherine Marsh was the last recorded death. That was 42 years ago. But the Halleck bloodline didn't end with her. There are still descendants, still people walking around today who carry that blood, who share that name, even if they don't know it. Some of them live quiet lives. Some of them have never heard the story, and some of them feel it, that pull, that weight, that sense that something is watching from a place they've never been but somehow recognize. In 2019, a man contacted a genealogy service. He wanted to trace his family back just for fun, just to see where he came from. His name was Michael Torrance, 34 years old, lived in North Carolina, no connection to Kentucky that he knew of. But when the results came back, there it was, Silas Halleck, 5 generations up, direct male line. And the moment Michael saw that name, he said something happened. He said he felt cold, not like a chill, like something opened up inside him, like a door he didn't know existed suddenly swung wide. He started having dreams, dreams of mountains, dreams of a cave, dreams of a man standing just outside his bedroom window, staring in, waiting. Michael's wife said he started talking in his sleep, saying things in a voice that didn't sound like his, saying, "I found what they were hiding," the same words Silas spoke in 1823. Michael had never heard that phrase. He'd never read the family history. He didn't even know there was a curse. But his blood knew. His blood remembered. Michael hasn't gone to Kentucky. Not yet. But he's thought about it. He's looked up the location of the old Halleck property. He's found the widow's mouth on satellite images. And late at night, when his wife is asleep and the house is silent, he sits at his computer and stares at that cave entrance on the screen, and he wonders what would happen if he went, if he walked inside. If he asked it, finally, after 200 years, what do you want from us? Because that's the question no one has ever answered. Silas went into that cave and came back changed. Every man after him was taken, touched, or destroyed. But no one knows why. No one knows what's in there. No one knows what Silas found, what he made a deal with, or what part of him he left behind that his descendants are still paying for. And maybe that's the real curse. Not the deaths, not the fear, but the not knowing, the living with a weight you can't see. A debt you didn't agree to, and a shadow that's been following your family for so long it feels like it's part of your name. The widow's mouth is still there, somewhere in the hills of eastern Kentucky, hidden beneath moss and thyme. And the Halleck bloodline is still out there too, scattered, unaware, carrying something they didn't ask for and can't put down. And maybe one day someone will go back, someone will walk into that cave with a camera, a light, and the desperate hope that they can end it, that they can be the one who finally breaks the curse. But history says otherwise. History says the mountains don't let go. History says that when you carry a name like that, when you carry blood like that, you don't get to choose when it's over. It chooses. and it hasn't chosen yet. The photograph still exists, the one from 1887, 7 men standing in front of a mountain, and if you look closely, if you zoom in on the background, you can see something else. Something standing just inside the mouth of the cave. Something that isn't quite human. Something that's been waiting a very, very long time, and it's still waiting now.